Hi guys, it's Burp here and welcome to today's exclusivity report. And today I'm going to give you guys a deeper look into a couple of different time frame instances of Bitcoin USD spot price Bitstamp exchange. Let's kick it off with a weekly chart. To start with, well, we are looking, of course, at a bear market sequence, right? Escaping this kind of like a sideways pattern, which is rather not typical, I should say, to Bitcoin's history, where you would usually have these kind of like strong blow off, peaks here or here, rather than just slow pacing 2 year long pattern almost. You're looking at the, of course, at a very apparent decline taken as low as 75% to the downside of the peak, right? So the drawdown, the pain so far to the peak holders is, I should say, somewhere around 75%. They are heavily underwater. Typically, Bitcoin reverses its historical troughs, puts these historical bottoms within the bear markets, at 80 to 90% of the drawdown, right? So technically, again, if there is some empirical probability to it, I would say that the more likely than not, we still may have some pain to come, potentially taking us lower through the lows, perhaps as low as the 2004 2019 highs of $14,000, if you will. There is some aggregation of support areas, right? X resistances, new support areas again coming as the peakish zone, in the past, basically. If past is of any lesson, if history is of any indication, I would argue that the previous resistances may turn into support, and this is why I would indicate what I would expect the previous resistance areas to be kind of like taken into consideration in case our decline comes in. And then on top of that, you of course would have the price range territory, like I said, 80, let's say, give it 85%, takes us as low as $10,000, potentially $14,000 is 80%, which may give a little bit of a slippage, to the downside in case some external exogenous kind of like trigger comes in. While it's not set in stone, while the history again rhymes, it doesn't repeat itself. You're not likely going to see a very exactly the same behavior as taken in the past, like exactly the same reversal patterns, right? I think it makes little sense to anticipate, like this ascending triangle or this V-shaped recovery, right? Just like you would have in here. You cannot just take the old patterns, and represent with the small sample size that with those one or two pattern instances and literally extrapolate it here into the future. It doesn't really work this way. And in fact, if we commit such a mistake, such an error, it's actually labeled as a representativeness bias, right? So it doesn't really work this way. Well, frankly speaking, we are trading below 200-week average, which is not necessarily the most frequent instance, right? It doesn't often happen for Bitcoin to trade for a long time up, where lower below 200-week average, right? It happens only a couple of times in the history. And history, again, historically speaking, more often than not, people who were buying into or under 200-week average historically have been more profitable than those who were selling that. Okay, and even if we take it lower to the daily chart, right, then you are still looking at this 200 kind of like a day average. We may try to make it even um, actually we may try to take it to secure this weekly time frame. Okay, so this is a daily chart with a weekly 200-week average, which is the one that is seen literally a second ago, right? And we are trying to consolidate around this 200-week average. It's not necessarily the most apparent, the most classical, typical kind of like a reversal pattern you would see. There's a lot of chop, fake out on top, right? There's some fake outs here on the way as well due, right? So far, it's a sequence of higher high and high lows, which is promising. However, it's not enough, I should say, to breach and to break through above the 200-week average, which would be the first considerable sign of strength where it showed weakness before, right? So in order to see some sort of like a follow through confirmation, I want to see a daily or a weekly close above 200-week average, which is 22,500s, if I'm not mistaken, 22,600s, right? So give it a proper close through this resistance right? And this increases the potential for short-term retracement upwards recovery, pull back into the $28,000 region or even higher, as in 33, 35, potentially making it even higher, 40 $40,000 as the next resistance, that next logical step with a fake out on top, right? However, again, that's a pretty long way from the current level. So first off, I want to see a strength where it showed weakness before, as in first encounter, first barrier at 200-week average. So far, the first attempt has been, well, neutralized, or I should say invalidated, with a fake out on top, right? A fake out, typical bull trap setup, where you get the trigger from the break in resistance. The new breakout is triggered, but then it fails, right? And it fails to maintain the previous support, the new support area, which should have been maintained. And this failure commits to a larger pattern development, right? As in, the failed patterns tend to perform better than the regular ones. So again, if you were to see this typical kind of like a consolidation pattern and it breaks out, you would anticipate that it has the applied measured move, right, of the base size. Imagine this is a base size of an X, right? And this base size is applied on top of that, with the same X distance, basically to take it higher and fatter. But instead, when we get this pattern breakup failure, right, while it could have generated an X to the upside, it would likely generate Y to the downside, which is even stronger and more and better performing. That's what the history learns. And finally, again, no trend lines, have been just kind of like essentially, well escaped just yet. You're looking at some slow, different angles, different slopes, right? So far, again, of course, short-term trend trajectory has flipped from the downside to sideways. It's consolidating, potentially accumulating. However, the confirmation is not there yet. Hope it actually makes sense. And that's all about the short term. That's all about the short term pattern that is developing within the longer term downtrend.